In this video, we're explaining Invincible Season 3 in around 20 minutes or less, and by the end you'll have everything you need to know, including some of the changes between the comic and the show. Okay, so Season 3 begins roughly 90 days after Anissa came to Earth, and in that time, Ceecil had become Mark's personal trainer. In preparation for a full-scale Viltrumite invasion, Invincible increased all of his physical stats and got to test out his new power against Multiple. Paul is the twin brother of Dupli-Kate, and like his sister, he's able to create perfect copies of himself. Following Kate's death, Paul blamed the other Guardians of the Globe for allowing it to happen, hence why he attempts to kill Rex. Mark tries to save his friend by destroying over 50 copies of Paul, but before he reaches the real one, Dupli-Kate shows up. It turns out that the Kate who got squished in Season 2 was a copy, and the real Kate was planning to run away and just start a new life. However, because of her feelings for the Immortal, she just couldn't bring herself to do it, and so the two of them return to the Guardians of the Globe. Multiple then gets sent to jail for what he did to Rex, while Invincible goes to Eve's house for the first time in months. For context, ever since Eve from the future said that she was in love with him, Mark had been avoiding the present day version. In fact, they hadn't spoken for so long that Mark didn't even know she was planning to go to college, but after getting some encouragement from William and Rex, he decides to finally ask her out. The problem here is that Mark immediately fumbled by telling her everything that the future Eve told him. From Eve's point of view, this made her feel like Mark was only asking her on a date because he felt sorry for the sad older version. Before they could properly discuss it though, Ceecil called them to a life or death mission. Miles beneath the surface of the Earth, nearly all of the major heroes had been kidnapped by a villain called Doc Seismic. Seismic is a generic mad scientist who was defeated by Mark and Eve in Season 1, but since then he made friends with these indestructible bugs. These creatures live near the core of the Earth, and even with Invincible's new strength, he still couldn't beat them. As the heroes were then all about to be crushed to death, Ceecil intervened by sending in the Reanimen and also Darkwing number 2. Quick reminder, Darkwing 2 is a former villain whose powers give him access to a dimension called the Shadowverse. This dimension is where he previously tried to trap Invincible forever, and besides that, he also killed a bunch of people for minor crimes. After arresting him in Season 2, Mark assumed that Darkwing was in jail, and likewise the Reanimen were created by D.A Sinclair, another villain who Mark thought was locked up. Regardless, these bad guys save the day when Darkwing captures Doc Seismic, and the Reanimen rescue all heroes including Invincible. This situation causes Mark to throw a tantrum as he angrily confronts Ceecil for working with killers. His argument was that murderers like this don't deserve a second chance, and he refused to leave the GDA until they were both put back in prison. When Ceecil was younger, he had a similar mindset to Invincible. However, his boss taught him that to save the world, you need to be practical, which sometimes means working with sus people. In the present day, Ceecil felt threatened by Mark's outburst, and so he activated his secret weapon. This weapon is a tiny microphone that was put inside Invincible's head after his fight with his dad. By flipping a switch, Ceecil can transmit a high-pitched frequency directly to the mic, the same frequency that damaged Mark when he was in Atlantis. Feeling betrayed, Invincible flies to the Guardians of the Globe HQ, where Robo and the other heroes step in to save him. A battered and bruised Mark then vows to never work for Ceecil again, while Rex and most of the Guardians choose to leave as well. Later that same night, Invincible uses his near-death experience to rizz up Eve, and it actually works because this time she does agree to go out with him. That said, their very first date gets cancelled after Oliver kills the Mauler twins. For context, in the first episode of Season 3, Oliver's powers kicked in, and since then Mark had been trying and failing to keep him under control. On one occasion, the Mauler twins took over a nuclear facility, defeated all the remaining Guardians, and had a special gun that slowed down Invincible. Now, despite Debbie telling Oliver not to go, he went anyway to help his brother and murdered both Mauler twins in the process. Worse than that, he didn't show any hesitation or any remorse after he'd done it, because his mindset was that killing the bad guys now stops them from hurting anyone else in the future. Mark strongly disagreed with that since he has his whole no killing rule, unless it's killing in self-defense like what happened with Angstrom. Because of Oliver, Mark was late to his first date with Eve, and they decided to just reschedule it for another day. Sadly, as soon as they sat down for their first real date, Invincible got ambushed by a pair of time-traveling brothers. These time travelers were called Dropkick and Fightmaster, and they came from hundreds of years in the future specifically to find Mark. In their time, the world is at war with a mad king who'd ruled the planet for centuries. This superpowered king forced everyone to work in labor camps, wiped out 10 cities by himself, and left entire nations to survive without power. Previously, Dropkick and Fightmaster had tried to kill him by traveling back in time to steal the Declaration of Independence. The rumor going around was that ink from this document would be able to poison the king, and that's because this mad tyrant was Abraham Lincoln. Yeah, seriously. In the Invincible universe, Lincoln was a warrior who lived for thousands of years before he became president, and in the modern day, he's the superhero known as the Immortal. At some point between now and the far future, the Immortal transforms from a good guy into a dictator, and the reason these brothers need Mark's help is because their special poison didn't work. When Invincible then comes face to face with Immortal from the future, we find out some pretty interesting lore about what happened. For a start, Immortal reveals that a long time ago Mark left Earth with his family and apparently had way more muscle than he does right now. Immortal also mentions how in the future Mark is an emperor. In fact, he specifically says that Invincible is the one who appointed him as the king of Earth. Following that, the king gradually went crazy since every person he loved just kept dying over and over again. To end his suffering, he began doing evil things to the population in the hope that it would bring his Invincible back to Earth. His ultimate dream was that Mark would put an end to his life, and although future Mark was just clearly too busy, our version of Mark reluctantly did the job. By decapitating the Immortal, he went against his no-killing rule, but to be fair, the Immortal provoked him a lot, not to mention, killing him freed billions of people from a dictator. Regardless, Invincible still felt guilty, but when he gets back to the present day, Eve tries to reassure him that he's not a bad person. The two of them then go on a date that spans across the entire planet, and while they have a good time, Omni-Man was somewhere else getting beaten to death. After months of being locked up, it was finally time for his Viltrumite execution, but luckily Alan had a plan to save him. Remember, in season 2, Alan let himself get arrested so he could find Nolan, because he wanted to recruit Omni-Man to the coalition of planets. Over time, the two of them actually became friends, and on the day of Nolan's execution, Alan broke out his cell, freed a bunch of prisoners to create maximum chaos, and then escaped with his new BFF. When they made it out though, Alan was concerned that more Viltrumites might come, but Nolan confirmed that wouldn't happen because there are less than 50 pure Viltrumites in the entire universe. Although he doesn't explain why their numbers are so low, he reveals that this is the Empire's biggest secret, and it's why the Viltrumites can genuinely be defeated. Back on Earth, Mark and Eve needed money so they could get their own place, but instead of making another golden apple, she decides that they actually need to get a job. This is why Eve creates a business called Invincible Inc., where they get paid to protect a prison called Peyton Penitentiary. This prison is where Multiple was being held, but ever since he arrived here, his boss Mr. Liu had been trying to break him out. Mr. Liu is an international crime lord, and centuries ago, a dragon that could have ended the world was trapped inside his body by magic. In that sense, Liu is protecting the world from the dragon's true power, but he has the ability to tap into it and use some of the dragon's strength for himself. This strength is how he became the leader of the Order, which is a secret society. Each member of the Order controls crime in a specific area of the world, and previously Machine Head was the one in charge of Chicago. Usually, it'd be his responsibility to break Multiple out of prison. However, in season 1, he got replaced by Titan. After taking over Chicago, Titan wanted nothing to do with the Order, but Liu threatened to kill his family if Paul wasn't set free. In response, Titan made a secret deal with his old enemy, Machine Head, that would allow both of them to get what they want. For Titan, he wanted to be in charge of Chicago without any obligations to the Order, and for Machine Head, he wanted to take charge of the Order itself by killing Mr. Liu. Through a series of events, Titan forced Liu into trying to free Multiple himself, and while Invincible kept the dragon busy, Liu's real body was vulnerable. By Mark fighting the dragon for so long, it gave Machine Head enough time to execute the real Liu and then take over the Order in his place. As the new leader, he then allowed Titan to have Chicago to himself, so in that way everybody wins except Invincible, who understandably felt like he got used. While he was moping around, Mark decides to slow things down with Eve, and they agreed not to move in together just yet. One of his main reasons was that recently Oliver had been stressing out Debbie by sneaking out of the house at night. From the comics, we know that Thraxans barely need any sleep, so for now Mark wanted to stay at home and keep an eye on his brother to help out his mom. As a family, the Graysons then head to a memorial service for the 2,000 victims who died when Omni-Man tried to conquer the world. On that day, Invincible tried to save a woman called Jessica Duval and also her daughter Gretchen, but they were crushed when a building fell on top of them. Jessica's brother Scott was one of the survivors, and after Omni-Man left Earth, Scott directed all of his anger towards Invincible. After trying and failing to get Mark put on trial for murder, Scott decides to become the vigilante known as Plowplex. His goal was to kill Invincible as justice for everyone that died, and as it turns out, Scott was born with the power to turn kinetic energy into electricity. This means the harder you hit him, the more electricity he can produce, and at the memorial service, Plowplex shows up looking for his #1 target. I should point out, this wasn't the first time that Scott had tried to lure out Invincible, it's just that the last time Mark ignored him because he was out bowling with his friends, including his old girlfriend Amber. This scene was unironically one of the biggest changes from the comics, which gave Amber a much darker storyline. In issue 56, it was revealed that not only did her dad recently die, but her new boyfriend Gary was abusive. When Invincible found out, he dangled Gary off the side of a building and promised to murder him if he ever hurt her again. By contrast, the show is nothing like that. In fact, Amber's new boyfriend Kyle is someone Mark really gets along with. Now, switching back to Powerplex, at the memorial service, Eve deals with him by herself, and so the next time, Scott tries a different plan. In order to get Invincible to face him, Powerplex threatened to kill 2 innocent hostages. The reality, however, is that these hostages were his son and wife, who was pretending to be a hostage so that Invincible would actually arrive. From the beginning, Scott's wife wanted revenge as much as he did, hence why she spit in Mark's face when he tried to save her. Following that, Powerplex caught Invincible by surprise, and in this scene he unleashes what he thought was a fatal dose. However, in a tragic twist, the only people he killed was his own family, who got cooked when the electricity traveled through the floor. That same night, Scott was then locked up in Peyton Penitentiary, and with everyone he loved being dead, he vowed to break out and find Invincible. Luckily for him, this happened almost immediately, thanks to an event known as the Invincible War. For context, months earlier after Mark pummeled Angstrom Levy, the scientist used his last bit of HP to open a portal. On the other side of that portal were the technicians, who were geniuses from an alternate version of Earth. In the season finale, it was revealed that they ruined their own planet, and so they figured Angstrom's powers could find them a new home. That's why they rebuilt him after Invincible did what he did, and for months, Angstrom had been plotting his revenge. His plan was to destroy Mark's reputation all over the world by hiring evil variants of him to attack the main timeline. Some of these variants had done horrific things to their version of Angstrom, but he was willing to overlook that if it meant making this Mark suffer. Although it wasn't mentioned in season 3, one of the big reasons he hates this Invincible so much is because his intervention is what directly led to Angstrom getting disfigured. This disfigurement is something he never got over and never really accepted, and in issue 60, he explicitly says that he wants to disfigure him back. Now, on the first day of the Invincible War, all of the variants were teleported to the main timeline, where they immediately start tearing up the planet. I'm sure many of you know the show made various changes when it came to who the variants were fighting and which of the variants survived, and by far the biggest upgrade was Omnimark. In my video explaining every variant, I described Omnimark as having no aura, and that's because in the comics, he got killed by regular C-tier heroes. However, in the show, he survives all 3 days of the Invincible War, and I actually have a bit of a meta theory as to why that is. When we analyze the 8 Marks who survived in the comics, you'll notice that they all have different designs from the main Invincible, except for one. This variant right here is indistinguishable from the main Invincible, and I honestly believe they swapped him out for 2 reasons. Reason 1 is that Omnimark's design is a lot more distinctive and unique, but let's be real, reason 2 was to avoid confusion. If they had stuck with the original design that looks exactly the same as the Invincible that we follow, you can't deny there would have been some people confused about why Mark is working with Angstrom. I'm sorry, that is just the truth. Even if it's a small number, even if it was like 1%, it's still a lot of people, to be honest. By swapping him out for someone who's clearly different, it just clears up any confusion that might have popped up, since none of these variants address the same as the main Invincible. Anyhow, on the first day of the war, Peyton Penitentiary got destroyed by Mohawk Mark, who was described by Mark in issue 60 as being evenly matched with him when it came to strength. The destruction of the prison led to Powerplex getting free, and on day 2 of the war, he fries another one of the Invincible variants. What's insane is that he burnt this Mark so badly that we can't even tell who it is. So, you have to assume that this Mark just had no idea what Scott's power was. It kept punching him and punching him and punching him until he reached his full potential. Meanwhile, over at the GDA, Ceecil and Donald took down Flax and Mark, and it was during this scene that we found out that not all Invincibles are on the same level as ours. That explains why so many of them got wrecked, but sadly, even in these circumstances, the Immortal still couldn't get a win. At Guardians HQ, the heroes were being ripped apart literally by one of the strongest Mark variants. Quick reminder, after Rex and the others left the team, Darkwing stepped in as the newest member of the Guardians, and in this scene he sacrificed himself to trap Invincible inside the Shadowverse. Speaking of sacrifices, the heroes who left the Guardians all got taken down by a different variant, and probably all would have been killed if it wasn't for Rex. With very few options left, Rex blew up his own skeleton, which was enough to vaporize this version of Mark. Rex's death had a huge impact on everyone, especially Eve, Shrinking Ray, and Robot, who from this moment decided to change his own name to Rex. Having already stolen Rex's DNA, taking his name was insane, but it seems like no one else cared because, they know he's kind of neurodivergent, and this was his own way of paying tribute. When it comes to the main Invincible, on day 2, he and Eve faced off against Omnimark and Hoodvincible, and being the only non-Viltrumite here, Eve got smashed into a coma. This put Mark in a situation where he'd have to fight two variants at once while also protecting her, which, to put it simply, is impossible. Thankfully, Ceecil saved him by sending in the Reanimen, and for the rest of the war, Mark stayed with Eve in hospital, even though he was desperately needed elsewhere. His reasoning was that the other versions of himself know about Eve, and they know about the GDA hospital, being the best in the world, so it is possible that they might have come after her, and if he wasn't there, then yeah, she'd probably be killed. Having said that, shortly after the war ended, Mark did make a comeback when Angstrom Levy returned to this dimension. By this point, the surviving Mark variants had betrayed Angstrom, partly due to his plan getting most of them killed, and so he stranded all of them in the barren dimension. This meant he didn't have backup against the main Invincible, and Mark had learnt to dodge his portals following their last encounter. Once he defeated Angstrom, Mark was urged by his brother to kill him, but at the last second the villain escapes to the Technician dimension. His plan was for them to quickly fix his arm before returning to the fight, along with the other 8 Invincibles, but the Technicians had other ideas. Having already fixed him previously, all they cared about now was him using his powers to find them a new home. The implants in Angstrom's brain meant that they could torture him however they wanted, and so for the foreseeable future, revenge against Mark isn't his main concern. In the immediate aftermath of the war, the death count was expected to reach millions, with most of Earth's major cities being crushed by the different Invincibles. On top of that, a bunch of heroes died, but someone who survived yet another decapitation was the Immortal. After waking up, he instantly retires from being a hero along with Kate, and with both of them gone, Ceecil proposes that Mark leads the Guardians of the Globe. Invincible rejects the idea straight away, since in his words he was done working with Ceecil, but within just a couple hours of saying this, he'd be begging for his help. To understand why, we should flash back to season 2, when Anissa warned Mark that someone stronger than her would eventually come to Earth. That person is Conquest, who's a Viltrumite even more powerful than Omni-Man. In the wake of the Invincible War, he arrived to check if Mark had prepared Earth for a Viltrumite takeover, just like General Krieg had told him to do. Of course, Mark hadn't done anything, and so the two of them instantly start throwing hands. Because the difference in strength was so massive, Conquest tried various things to motivate Invincible into giving him a good fight. This includes ripping Oliver nearly in half, wiping out a beach full of innocent people, and slicing a hole through Eve. Quick reminder, Eve had joined the battle shortly after regaining consciousness, despite being warned that Conquest is the toughest Viltrumite they'd ever seen. Realizing that she was about to die, this is when Mark called for help, but for plot reasons, Ceecil had to sit things out and just wait until the fight was over. That's because Eve's full power allows her to manipulate living matter, but she can only do it in rare situations like when she's about to die. By Conquest slicing through her, he allowed Eve to tap into her true potential, as she rebuilt her own body while frying off most of his skin. This gave Mark the chance to go even more feral than he already was, because he followed this up by headbutting Conquest to death, or at least that's what should have happened. In reality, although Mark had nearly finished him off, and although Ceecil made it appear like he was dead, the GDA secretly kept Conquest alive in an underground facility. Why did Ceecil do this? Well, for all he knows, the Viltrum Empire has thousands of soldiers on the same level as Conquest, so what he really wanted was intel. The GDA had no other way of preparing Earth for an invasion, so in that sense you can see where he's coming from. The problem is that trapping the strongest known Viltrumite in a block of steel is just incredibly risky business, considering some of the feats that weaker Viltrumites have been able to do. In an ideal world, Ceecil could have maybe, cut off his limbs or something like that, but the problem is that Viltrumites are so sturdy, and especially a Viltrumite like Conquest, it just wouldn't be possible, or it would take way too long, and he'd probably wake up before it was complete. Lastly, before we end the video, here are 5 plot points that I hadn't mentioned that you probably need to know. Number 1, Robot designed a special belt for Monster Girl, which means she now doesn't get younger every time she transforms. And what this essentially means is that for the foreseeable future, she'll just be growing up like a normal person. Her powers now won't affect her age. 2, even though the heroes thought Multiple was in prison, the reality is that the real Multiple escaped while leaving one of his copies behind. Also, on a related note, despite his master getting shot, Mr. Liu is secretly still alive. 3, following the Invincible War, the GDA collected all the dead bodies of the alternate marks, and now D.A Sinclair is creating Viltrumite Reanimen. 4, after his fight with Conquest, Mark changed his philosophy and decided that the next time he's up against a serious villain, he won't hesitate to kill them. Throughout the series, Mark had been feeling guilty about various civilian deaths, and the Invincible War helped to open his eyes, because he realized that millions could have been saved if he just killed Angstrom the first time around. When you combine that with what he had to do to Conquest, Invincible realized that his brother was right, and that sometimes you need to put a permanent end to certain people. Finally, the last plot point was the return of Damien Darkblood, which is something that doesn't happen in the comics. Darkblood was a demon detective that investigated Nolan's murder of the Guardians in Season 1. As we know, he was banished to hell by Ceecil to prevent the truth from coming out, because Ceecil just wanted more time to figure out how to deal with Omni-Man. In the present day, Darkblood summons a demon who he refers to as the Great Beast, among other things, and it's implied that this guy used to be in charge of hell. Darkblood offers him a way to reclaim his throne by bringing a powerful character from Earth down to the underworld. Based on the context, my original guess was that he was talking about Omni-Man, but since Nolan isn't on Earth, it's possible that Mark, Oliver, or even both of them could get dragged to hell instead. With that said, that was Invincible Season 3 in around 20 minutes or less, and if you liked the video, please drop a like as it does help out the channel. Thanks for watching as always, and until the next one, peace out.